In determining the best ways to diversify your retirement portfolio, you need to change the inputs, look at the income streams, and decide what trade-off to make between inflation and market risk. There are no easy answers. Hi, I'm Will Hoffman, founder and president of Hoffman Wealth Management, where we specialize in working with busy families and active retirees, helping them navigate the complicated scenarios of their wealth while creating the life that they desire. Conventional wisdom states that investment habits should change in retirement. Once you shift from the accumulation phase to the distribution phase, you presumably have everything you're ever going to have. So the goal now is to make those assets last as long as you live while generating an income along the way. Let's start with the assumption that stocks carry market risk and bonds carry purchasing power or inflation risk. The central question you'll need to address is, what's your ideal asset allocation between stocks and bonds? It wasn't so long ago that the standard practice was to subtract your age from 100 and put that amount in stocks. So the recommendation for a 60-year-old was to put 40% in stocks and 60% in bonds. For a 70-year-old, 30% in stocks and 70% in bonds. During the bull market of the late 1990s, that advice even seemed a little too conservative. The market risk we normally associate with equities was so imperceptible at the time it seemed non-existent. Then the market turned. Portfolios started to lose value, and retirees became extremely nervous. With no income outside of that generated by their portfolio, they had no way to make up for those losses. Many got out of stocks entirely. These defectors didn't care about inflation risk. They just didn't want to lose any more money. So then the question arose, was the entire approach flawed? Should the asset allocation be viewed differently depending on whether the investor is still working or accumulating or in retirement withdrawing? John Reckenthaler, an investment manager and Morningstar research director at the time, published an excellent article on this subject. Meeting the Needs of Retirees, a different twist on asset allocation, in January of 2000 issue of the Journal of Financial Planning. Among his points, a longer time horizon usually reduces risk because it means there is more time to make up losses caused by volatility. But for retirees, time is an enemy, not a friend. The longer the time horizon, the greater the probability that they will suffer the ultimate failure, the loss of all their assets. This would suggest that a person who retires at age 55 needs to be even more conservative than an 80-year-old who has less time for the various risks to chip away the value of their portfolio. To an accumulator, it doesn't matter if returns are clustered at the beginning of the period or the end. The accumulator cares only about the final results, not the ride along the way. But to a living, breathing retiree, the timing of returns can be of greater importance than their absolute level. According to one study, a hypothetical client who retired in 1968 with $250,000 and withdrew 8.5% per year would see his assets last 30 years if returns were averaged smoothly over the years. But an actual client who lived through that market period would have run out of money by 1981. This is because the poor returns for that particular period came up front, depleting the asset base too soon. Reckenthaler points out that computing power now can process hordes of simulations that help shed light on asset allocation and withdrawal rates for retirees. Let's look at some common sense consideration. First, we change the inputs. During your earning phase, the goal is the lump sum that will be needed at retirement. But that's really only the first phase of the overarching goal of being able to withdraw the needed income during retirement and ensure that those assets last a lifetime and beyond if you wish to leave a legacy to heirs or a charity. Before retirement, the primary asset allocation considerations are the amount being saved, the rate of return, the length of time between now and retirement, the number of years in retirement, your own psychological tolerance to risk, meaning how much volatility will cause you to lose sleep at night. But after retirement, the considerations become the amount of annual income needed, the size of the asset base, the rate of return on investment assets, and the always tricky life expectancy. Risk tolerance is also important, but in retirement, it is not measured by your personal level of risk aversion. At that point, the real risk lies in the likelihood that you will run out of money. When stated this way, every retiree's risk tolerance is zero. What makes asset allocation in retirement such an individual matter is that the ultimate risk, running out of money, is different for everyone. That's why it is so essential to get qualified, personalized financial planning advice that revolves around you, rather than turning to some one-size-fits-all model portfolio or a product or a rule of thumb that does not consider other income sources you may possess. Typical prescribed models for current retirees allocate 20% to 40% to stocks. This could be too much or too little when other variable assets are taken into consideration. Here are some issues to ponder when figuring out an asset allocation strategy. First, find and value all of your assets. A mistake the financial community tends to make is basing allocation planning on the pool of financial assets available for investment. But Social Security, pension income, annuity income, and income from work should also be considered part of the mix. We can call that the expanded portfolio. If your income is certain to continue for life, like Social Security or pensions, the income stream itself could be considered an asset, similar to a bond. The value of this bond is the present value of the future income stream. For example, a monthly pension of $3,000 per month or $36,000 per year has a present value of $622,513, assuming a 4% discount rate and a 30-year time horizon. The present value of Social Security benefits for a high-income person who was born in 1950 is $572,000 for men and $683,000 for women. If the income is less certain, like income from work, you should probably not count it at all. In fact, it might be safer to assume it will stop at some point and will need to be made up from other sources. You should also identify the trade-offs. In addition to valuing the income as an asset, it's also advisable to consider whether it includes an inflation adjustment. If not, you will need to make larger withdrawals from your investment account in the future, and this will influence the decision of where you will ultimately place your assets. The main purpose of investing money in stocks is to grow the portfolio for when higher withdrawals become necessary. Advisors typically recommend taking on market risk to soften inflation risk. But what if you have more than enough assets to cover the inflation risk? If you have no need to assume market risk, it could be argued that the allocation to stocks could be as low as zero. On the other hand, it could also be argued that the extra assets beyond the amount needed to ensure the inflation-adjusted income stream could be allocated to virtually any category because they won't ever need to be used. So, if you do have enough assets to ensure a lifetime of inflation-adjusted income, it almost doesn't matter how much you allocate to stocks. In this scenario, you might establish additional goals such as contributions to charity and base your allocation decision on those. Having less wealth presents a real conundrum. Inflation risk, if ignored, can virtually assure the depletion of your asset base. In other words, if you can only eke out enough money to make today's living expenses, there's sure to be trouble 10 or 20 years from now. A high allocation to bonds can therefore be very, very risky. But any amount allocated to stocks in an attempt to mitigate inflation risk is subject to market risk. This strategy could also deplete your assets, although that risk is not as certain. There is no easy solution. This conundrum should be dealt with as an evaluation of whether you'll have enough assets, including Social Security and pension, to ensure adequate inflation-adjusted income to age 95. Because of these uncertainties, there is no clear answer as to how much you should invest in stocks. It may simply come down to preference, to what degree you would rather face inflation risk, and have to lower your standard of living versus assuming market risk and possibly depleting your portfolio too soon. It's not a very pleasant choice, is it? But it's a scenario you need to consider in investing your assets over your retirement. Hopefully, you'll never have to make that kind of decision, but it's always good to explore all the possible outcomes and position your assets to achieve your long-term retirement goals.